Despite women making up the majority of South Africa's voters' roll, some gender equality experts fear that women will continue to be underrepresented in the country's top positions of political power post the May 29 elections. With more than 50% of registered voters being women, approximately 3 million more women than men are expected to mark their leader in the upcoming elections. Although women being such a strong demographic, women make up just 42% of all those seeking elected office. As many countries across the world make progress on encouraging female representation and participation, how do we do the same in South Africa? Joining me for that conversation is Professor Cheryl Hendricks, who is the Executive Director of the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, to weigh in. Good morning, and thank you so much for joining us, Professor.
Morning, Masachabe. Good to be with you.
Now, the numbers suggest that women show up when it comes to registering and marking their leader in the elections. Isn't it bizarre, then, that some political parties are seemingly not committed to breaking the cycle of gender exclusion?
Women make up, as you indicated, 55% of the electorate. To me, what has been amazing is none of the political parties have actually specifically targeted women for their votes. With 3 million more votes to be garnered with women there, you would have expected much more of an emphasis on the issues that concern women. But we haven't seen this precisely because it is a very contested vote. Here's women's representation on the in terms of candidates at 41%, which relative to other countries is pretty high. And South Africa does do well in terms of representation of women in parliament, as cabinet ministers and so forth. However, that's primarily because the ANC has a zebra list. A number of the other parties do not have that zebra list. So when the contestation is so high, we do worry that representation of women is going to decrease rather than increase.
So you would agree then, Professor, that women are often relegated to supporting roles and contend with direct resistance to their participation in leadership. Why do you think such barriers still exist 30 years into democracy?
Because we still live in a predominantly patriarchal society. Despite all the legislation, the culture has not changed. And so women's participation, much like in other countries, tends to be, dominated by a fear almost of engaging, a fear of harassment, etc. What we have set up, Mr. Chaba, and this is not just to increase women's participation in the elections. This is to ensure that South Africa has a peaceful, credible elections, is a women's election mechanism for peace, where we advocate for peace, where we look at what's happening to women voters, with what is happening to women candidates on the day of election, on the day of elections, who is being harassed, etc. And so we have a two-pronged approach: what is happening to women during elections, and having set up a conflict prevention mechanism for all people, not just women, during the elections as well. And we call that the Women's Election Mechanism for Peace. And we have set this mechanism up in 5 provinces: Western Cape, Eastern Cape, Gauteng, Limpopo, and KwaZulu-Natal, those being our biggest provinces.
Now, the unfortunate thing is that this exclusion of women actually cuts even beyond politics. I mean, we see it in sport, in terms of the pay scale when it comes to men and women. We see it absolutely in the creative sector. We see it in the financial sector. We see it in the tech sector. Like, I could go on. And I acknowledge a lot has been done in the 30 years of democracy to fast-track the inclusion of women in positions of political power. But why is it that we're just not winning when it comes to the realization of the goal?
It's not translating into the lived experiences of women on the ground. So the face of poverty in South Africa remains a feminist face, a woman's face. The when we get to things looking at unemployment, etc., it's all women who are still marginalized here. And as I indicated, it is precisely because we haven't tackled the big issues around behavior, around practice, around values, etc. We need to have that shift in our relations, because gender equality is not just about representation. It is around a shift in power relations between men and women as well.
Yeah. And now, as we reimagine a new South Africa, Professor, and especially with the 29th of May looming, what does women's inclusion actually look like when it actually happens? And how does it stand to benefit society?
We don't want to be included just for the sake of being included. Yes, we want to be represented. That's a fight long won already, way back with CEDAW in 1979, which was the framework for non-discrimination against women. And so we shouldn't even be speaking about this at this particular point in time, right? Our continued marginalization and exclusion. But we want to be included to transform our societies. And I think that's the big missing gap here. It's not just simply about getting in, it's what we're going to do once we're in those positions. And unfortunately, that has stagnated a little in South Africa. We did very well, I think, in the first 15 years, but after that, we kind of dropped the ball on this one, and we need to pick that up again.
Yeah, and let's pick that up, actually. Let's expand a little bit more on that. I love how you say, you know, it's not about inclusion for the sake of inclusion, but rather that women are able to be put in positions where they can transform. It's one thing for political parties to have a set number of women in their list, but many question the positions, whether enough women will be placed in strategic positions of influence. How important is that, Professor?
It is important that we are placed in strategic positions, because that's when you can make the change. It is important that the numbers are there. Don't mistake me when I talk about not just about representation. The numbers are important because you have to have a critical mass to make the shift. But we as women also have to come together again, and especially now when there's so much uncertainty in our country. We should be the ones, given our 55%, to be determining a new vision for our country. We need to be hosting the dialogues that determine where it is we want to go in this country and how we want to get there. And when we are in positions of power, to make sure then that we deliver on those kinds of promises that benefit the whole of society, not just women.
I think it almost seems as though there is no willingness from various political parties to address this underrepresentation of women in leadership positions in politics. And if that's the case, then wouldn't it make more sense to ensure that quotas are legislated?
Well, the data certainly shows that if there's a quota system, you get more women into politics. And so we do advocate for quota system. It's a sure way of getting women in. And it doesn't mean, because the retort to that is, no, we want qualified women, etc. Sure, we are qualified. We don't have to be having those kinds of discussions any longer. But quota systems are the way to go to ensure that we are there.
Professor, thank you so much for your time.